Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Arpidio's LinkedIn Live. Here we talk about the account based sales revolution, and it's our 20th LinkedIn Live. We have something very special for you today. We'll talk about how to master the art of modern account planning with the special guest, Lee Levitt. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Max. Great to see you.
And Lee, let me see if I did my homework here. You're a mastermind when it comes to modern account planning. You've been working for Oracle, for Google in the last 10 years. I think you have facilitated over thousands of account planning sessions, and that goes with accounts for commercial accounts, for enterprise accounts, strategic accounts, and I think, and let me check my notes here. These accounts were driving a total estimated pipeline of 15 billion US dollars. If
Over
that's
those 10
correct.
years. Yeah.
Crazy, 15 billion US dollars.
Yeah. And Max, here's the funny thing. We did it all on whiteboards and PowerPoint and Revgy and Google Sheets. Can you imagine if I knew then what I know now? And before we get started, Max, I think we need to create a distinction between account plans and account planning. And this is a conversation that Ulrich and I had over a number of sessions last year. We both feel very strongly about this. Account plans are a checkoff item, a to-do, right? Fill it out, put it in the drawer, send a note to your manager saying, we did it. And so what do you get out of that? You get a drawer full of paper. And or a folder full of electronic paper, and there's no action. The best case is those account plans were an inventory of opportunities. And account planning is something that's totally different. Account planning is an ongoing process of co-creation, right? Getting with a customer and creating something from scratch, understanding what the customer is about, and bringing the vendor's knowledge, the company's knowledge about how their products and services are being used with the understanding of the business goals of the customer, and helping the customer seeing new ways of doing things, new ways of running their business. And that's a totally different exercise than filling out an account plan template. And then it's not a one and done. There are specific check-ins at regular intervals. You have to check in every 3 to 6 months on a formal basis, right? So a SAM, strategic account manager, or a CAD, key account director, is in constant contact with their stakeholders in an account. But more formally, you pull the team together on a regular basis, and you talk about where are we in terms of figuring out where we want to go. And by the way, from the sales leadership standpoint, what we're doing is validating the effort we're putting in. Right? Are we aligning with where the customer wants to spend their money? So this isn't just, an altruistic, let's help the customer be successful, right? We're going to be successful too.
And thank you for making this distinction also from the beginning, because this is kind of like the red thread of our conversation, right? And whiteboards, PowerPoints, and all that. It sounds like the Stone Age, Lee. Sounds like the Stone Age. But let's kick it off with a quick introduction to yourself. I think that makes it easier for the audience to follow the conversation, right?
Yeah. So Max, I just had a flashback. How we captured that institutional knowledge in those early days at Oracle. We pulled out our phones and we took pictures of our flip charts and of those whiteboards, so that we made sure that we remembered what we were talking about. And by the way, the process worked. The technology was weak, but the process worked. So most of this is brain work. It's not a manual process of writing down what we learned. It's actually the brain work. So here's why I love account planning. I came to it from strategy, business planning, channel management, where planning was the fuel that drove growth, right? When you talk with channel partners, it's all about, joint planning. I was an analyst for 10 years at IDC. I'm an I think about things, right? So
Mm,
I've carried a bag, I've run sales, I've launched companies, I've closed companies, I've built strategic partnerships, and I've spent the past 10 years or so in enablement and coaching.
mm,
And my context in all of that is
mm,
together we win. And that's
mm,
true for the sales rep and me. It's for the sales leader and me. It's the sales rep and their manager. And it's the customer and the vendor.
mm,
Together we win. So at Oracle, I helped build the sales enablement function where we launched a value selling initiative. And this is important because value selling is a mindset. It's not a methodology. It's not how to sell. It's how to
mm,
think about engaging with a customer. And without a value selling mindset, your account planning really focuses on opportunities. It doesn't focus on co-creation. And that mindset is critical for effective account planning. The rep and the team need to understand and align to the customer's strategic business objectives. We built a really rigorous account planning process, even though it was based on PowerPoint and and flip charts. That was tiered for commercial, enterprise, and CAD. Right. So a commercial account planning process would take 3 hours. An enterprise might take a day. A CAD account, we would spend 2 days at the customer site. Most
mm,
of our CAD
mm,
account planning happened in the customer's boardroom
mm.
because here's an important thing, a really important detail. If you don't have the customer's active participation in account planning,
Yeah.
you're just inventorying opportunities.
Mm, mm,
And so, I mentioned over 6 years at Oracle, and you actually mentioned it. I personally planned and facilitated about 1,000 account planning sessions. And I went back and I did the math, and it's like, wow, that's a lot. And at Google, I continued this focus really on account planning and a related initiative around greenfield penetration. And greenfield penetration is nothing more than the early stage of what should we talk about when we engage with this customer.
mm,
And then a year ago, after I left Google, here's a funny story. After I left Google, I launched a consultancy helping technology companies, both emerging and enterprise companies, to drive more revenue through improved account planning, formal opportunity development, and greenfield penetration, and formal
mm,
sales coaching. Now, here's the funny story. When I started to put together my focus on account planning as a series of deliverables, I realized the second thing a customer would ask is, how do we scale this?
mm,
And I asked myself that question in March. And I think 15 minutes after I put that down in my SWOT analysis of, oh, that's a potential weakness, Daniel reached out to me and said, hey, are you familiar with Arpedio? It's like, no, should I be? And very quickly the answer was, yeah, absolutely. Because Arpedio, and by the way, I don't want this to be a commercial for Arpedio, although it's
No, I
going to
love it. I
be.
love it. Keep
It's
going.
it's
Keep going.
it's
No, I'm
going to
joking.
be, right? Arpedio provides that platform that allows a company to scale up from 10 account
Mm,
planning sessions a year to
mm,
thousands. And in a large company, you have to be able to do that
yeah.
because you can't just do it with people. You have to be able to capture the institutional knowledge, the
Mm,
tribal knowledge that you generate over
mm,
the course of that time. You have to be able to track who's committing to doing things. You
mm,
have to be able to track the
mm,
relationship map or the
mm,
influence map. You have to be able to track, are we getting traction? Are we getting success? Is this function actually working? Because there are people in sales operations looking at investments. They're saying, okay, we're investing, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in this function, not in the technology, but in this
mm,
function that incorporates the technology. Are we getting value out of that, or should we buy more Super Bowl ads?
yeah.
Right. So literally, that's the question. Not everybody has the deep religion, so to speak, for account planning. They look at it on a cost basis, and account planning is one of the most profitable things you can invest in when it comes to driving sales.
And I'll pick this up again in a later question. But I want to take it a step back, and the reason for that is also I was asked the other day by a friend of mine who's a revenue leader of a very promising global scale up, and he kind of said, yeah, we want to improve our enterprise sales motion. We would like to include account plans, but where do I start? And I want to kind of bring this question to you, Lee. Let's say you founded a company, and you want to introduce modern account planning? Like, where would you start, and what are the best practices?
Right. So Max, that's a really good question. As you scale up a company, account planning can start really small. You start with the creation of hypotheses around what value is the customer looking for? Where are they looking to improve their corporate functions? Is it acquiring new customers? Is it
Mm,
manufacturing more efficiently? Is it higher quality manufacturing? Is it creating 360-degree
mm,
views of the customer? Is it implementing a workforce solution? Whatever those strategic objectives are, the first step is for the vendor, the salesperson, or the sales team to think, how can we help? Right. So you create this business value hypothesis of how we can help. And then you create a stakeholder hypothesis, which is
mm,
who should we talk to, right? And that's
mm,
where the relationship map or influence map comes into
mm,
play.
mm,
And the approach to a new customer is the part that precedes account planning. Once you engage with a customer and the customer is willing to talk with you about what their needs are, now you're in co-creation mode or
mm,
account planning mode. And literally, it can be two people sitting at a table at the local Starbucks. It
mm,
doesn't have to be fancy, right? When you're talking about, $1 million services contract, or a $20 million services contract, or a $50 million ULA renewal, your ELA renewal, then there are more people involved. It doesn't have to look like that for an emerging company. It looks like the the salesperson and the key stakeholder sitting down and talking about what's important to me and how can you help.
mm,
And hopefully that's the customer saying that, and not the salesperson saying that.
mm,
So here's a
mm,
funny story about account planning. We were doing an account planning session in a corporate boardroom with a company. I won't mention the name, but it was Prax Air. They're in the air business, and they were one of it may still be one of Oracle's strategic accounts. And I was facilitating the session in the morning, and the customer was there. The CIO and some of his team were there, and they shared with us what they were working on. And we had a long-standing relationship. And then we went to lunch. We had lunch with them, and then after lunch, I had an hour session set up to talk about key goals.
mhm,
And so I started to facilitate the session, and then there were about 30 salespeople in the room covering different pillars. And I said, okay, so what are the key goals we want to go after? And one after the other, the salespeople said, I need to get $1 million from this account. I need to get middleware in here. I need to get $50,000 of that. I need to renew this. And before I knew it, there was a runaway train.
mm,
All of the salespeople said, this is what I need to get out of the account. And after that session was over, my manager came up to me, and he normally didn't sit in on sessions, but he just happened to be in the area. And so he sat in, and he leaned in, and my good friend, Richard Shad, he leans in and he says, hey, Lee, how's it going? And he very demure, very casual. And I knew what he was asking was, that session was supposed to be focused on what are the goals of the customer we want to support, not what do the reps need to get out of it. And I said, Richard, it was a runaway train. It turned into a poop show. I won't swear on your LinkedIn Live. It turned into a poop show. I had to let them go and get it out of their system. If I
mm,
didn't, if I stopped them, I would have lost the room. The day would have been over. So I
mm,
said, we're going to come back, and we're going to reconfigure the schedule just a bit, and we'll get focused on what does the customer need. And
mm,
so that's really, when I think about account planning, we need to focus on what the customer wants to achieve. And so that's why, if it's 2 people or 100 people, it's that mindset of together we win. It's that mindset of co-creation for the
mm,
customer.
mm,
And so to answer your question a little bit differently, as companies expand this process, if you're talking about a larger company,
mm,
and there hasn't been a formal account planning going on, there is account planning going on. Right? Because any company will bring in experienced salespeople from other places, and those salespeople will have done either formal or informal account planning in other places. They've been at IBM, and they've been classically trained. They've been at Xerox, classically trained. They've been at some cloud company, and they've been trained. And so they're doing account planning on their own. And so what you want to do is you want to harness that energy and expertise and say, okay, let's pick a couple of teams that really want to do formal account planning
Yeah.
and bring in, develop a bit of a process, provide them the tools, provide them the customer knowledge or the customer background of share of wallet and strategic differentiators and what's in the 10Ks, the financial reports, the competitive situation, and help the team be ready to have that co-creation conversation and planning conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I guess this focus on the customer needs, I think that I could see as something that is similar for scale up, the big orgs. That's the same. But where are the differences when it comes to account planning when you look at a scale up and a big org?
Mm-hmm. So the key differences, Max, are in an enterprise company, you're going to have 30 people at the table from the vendor side. We used to call it the Oracle bus, right?
Mm.
So the bus would show up and 30 people would get out. In an emerging company, it's going to be two people. It's going to be the account manager and their sales engineer, and it might be two or three people from the customer. The conversations are the same. It's going to be a little bit more narrow in focus or less broad because there aren't as many people with different areas of interest. Smaller vendors or emerging vendors tend to be more boutique oriented. They don't have a broad portfolio to reflect. When we were doing account planning at Xerox, for instance, we had, I don't know, maybe $50 million, $100 million worth of stuff to talk about across a dozen or more different disciplines. A boutique vendor, and I mean that in a good way, a boutique vendor has like one thing to talk about.
Mm.
And so it's like, how can our cloud zero trust security app, security solution help you with security, right? It's a security conversation. The CIO and the CISO need to be there. That's it.
Yeah.
You don't need the entire technology team. You don't need the CFO to be there necessarily. So those emerging companies tend to have more focused conversations. But the process is the same. The process is, what are you working on? Here's our experience with related companies. Here's some thoughts on how we might be able to help. Who's involved? What's the schedule look like? What are you willing to commit to in terms of discovery and time and access? And what's the action plan look like for us to continue on with next steps? Because that action plan, for whether it's 2 people or 100 people at that meeting, if you don't have an action plan, if you don't capture what people need to follow up with, what people commit to in the time frame that they're committed to doing it, then it was just an academic meeting. And I was so pleased, Max, when it was either you or Daniel gave me a demo almost a year ago on our PDO. It's like, you capture those tasks? Wow. And I said to Ulrich, one of the things that differentiates a cloud-based solution that supports account planning is now sales operations can take a look to see what's the level of activity and what's the level of follow through. We didn't have that with our PowerPoints.
Yeah.
We didn't have that. We didn't know, right? Corporate was like, they were in the dark. It's like, how's it going? Good.
And that's also the luxury we are having being Salesforce native, right? Because we can tap into the Salesforce task functionality and all these kind of things. And Lee, what we see though a lot of times when we talk to companies before they become an RPDO client, a lot of times the creation of an account plan is this kind of an institutionalized process. So it happens once a year. You create your account plan, you maybe present it, then and a better way then is to put it in a drive or a SharePoint, but it does get lost and forgotten. Then at some point, somebody wants to see this account plan, which is already outdated, has to make several calls. Worst case, the person who made the account plan left the company and you start from scratch. My question for you here is, like, how does that switch work? Like, how do you get people away from this, I'm doing an account plan because that's my duty, to genuine account planning, right? How
Right.
does that work?
It's either really simple, Max, or it's really hard. It's really simple when if I say, if you want to move from selling product to creating value and co-creating value, and they get it, then it's easy. It's like, oh, Well, all of those documents in a share folder somewhere, nobody's looked at them, right? There's awareness that account planning is a checkoff item.
Mm,
And so it takes a sales leader who says, I've done good account planning in the past and I've seen the impact. And the impact is 50%, 100%, 1,000% higher revenues or more, higher customer profitability, higher sales productivity and profitability, higher uh, customer value, customer sentiment, the customer satisfaction, right? It's
mm,
all of those things that
mm,
if you ask a customer what they want to work on with you, and they're willing to create that time and access, it's a very different selling experience
mm,
than if you're trying to sell something to someone who isn't giving you the time of day to talk about what they care about.
yeah,
And so to some extent, it's a mindset. If a vendor says we have the best product in the world, everyone should buy it, they're
mm,
not ready for good interactive account planning.
mm,
If they believe that if their stuff actually helps customers drive better business and are willing to invest in helping customers understand that. Here's the one other piece that's really important, Max. Selling at its essence is about change management.
mm,
It's helping customers understand what change is involved in doing something differently,
mm,
and
mm,
and painting those new goals, or describing those new goals, and describing the different behaviors that are required to support those new goals, right? That's the definition of change management.
mm,
And account planning at some level, or the process of engaging with a customer, is the process of discussing the requirements for change. And without that, you're literally throwing a product over a wall and hoping the customer catches it and uses it appropriately.
and this is actually also tying a bit into my next question. So let's say somebody's watching this LinkedIn live session, right, and wants to introduce better account planning, or maybe want to make a change and say, hey, okay, I we are currently at this more institutionalized way of account plans. We want to do more of a modern account planning. Um, how, out of a change management perspective, like how do you get sales leaders and also sales teams on board?
Mhm. So, so I run into that a lot. And
Mm,
the approach that I take is, let's start modestly with a
mhm,
couple of sales teams that get it,
mhm,
right? Let's show success. Let's show what good looks like. And Max, that salespeople will flock to success. If they see their peers being successful doing something,
mm,
they'll do it. And it's a
yeah,
very simple story. I'm working with a couple of salespeople at a very large 3-letter company. I won't mention any names. And we're talking about dimensional direct mail, right? We're talking about sending something to prospects that to get their attention, right? So that just getting a first conversation going, and emailing and calls don't work. So we went through the vendor's internal shopping resource, and we said, not water bottles. How about water tumblers that are insulated with that 3-letter logo on it, and we're starting to send them out,
yeah,
right? And so the expectation is, if you do something a little bit different, if you do something that's focused on what the customer cares about,
mm,
if you help the larger sales organization see success
yeah,
in a particular function, then other people will want to do it. And I'm a very strong believer in this. Don't ask salespeople to do things that aren't related to their job,
mm, mhm,
right? Don't
mhm,
ask them to step away from their daily work to go do 12 hours of research on the share of wallet for the
mm,
account. Don't ask them to go figure out all of the competitive advantages and disadvantages of their product, right? Give the salespeople the tools to be successful, so that they can take those tools, they can read through them, they can create those hypotheses, and they can go and have a conversation,
mm,
right? Think about think about the pro race car driver. He pulls
mhm,
into the pits, right? He sits there for 8 seconds, and the tires get changed, and the gas gets refilled, and the windshield gets cleaned. He doesn't get out and do his own stuff. His job is to drive that race car.
yeah,
The salesperson's job is to drive that race car. I mean, drive that sale. But it's the same thing. It's like that salesperson should be focused, and we don't want to say, no, focus on something else. because corporate wants you to do that. No, corporate needs to provide the resources. And again, this is why we say start small and show success, because then you can build more resources to support a more and more modern account planning process.
And I love this comparison. But Lee, let's talk about action planning. You mentioned it before. I know you're a big fan of action planning. What role does that play in account planning?
So you and I and everyone on this live have been in meetings where maybe there was an agenda up front. There was, for a 60-minute call, there was 58 minutes of conversation, and then everyone said, good meeting, and they moved on to their next meeting. And maybe they take a bio break in between, but no one's keeping track of what do we need to do? Who's responsible for this? In a good account planning session, I have a flip chart keeping track of what don't we know, right? What don't we know? Keep track of that. What should we do to get access to this person? I'm keeping track of that. And so what we're doing is we're creating an inventory of actions that will drive the relationship forward and drive the opportunities forward. And near the end of a session, I'll pull that up and I'll say, okay, we've inventoried a bunch of things that are important. Let's go through it now and figure out what else do we need to do so that what we've discussed will actually turn into more value for the customer, that will turn into better time and access, that will ensure a good implementation that's 3 months down the pike. And so that's a formal capture of, and I learned this at a little company called Texas Instruments 100 years ago. It was a proprietary thing that they taught us. It was called the 3 W's: who, what, when. Who's going to do what, when? And literally at the top of my charts, I would write who, what, when. Who, what's the name? Who's responsible for it? And it's maybe different than who's going to do it. What are they going to do? And by when are they committing to do it? Now, the reality is 70 or 80% of that stuff might get done. A week later, you look at it and you go, you know what? In the heat of the moment, we thought that was important. It's not. Cross it off. All the other stuff needs to get done because it's actually in the planning process. That's what we decided was important to help drive that opportunity forward. There was that group co-creation of, again, with the customer through parts of it, that we've decided are important to help the customer achieve their goals.
It's kind of following also this idea of a meeting is only as good as the meeting protocol, or like a meeting is only as good as the action items that have been noted down. So I really like this. I'm very German when it comes to meeting protocols and being very profound with it. So I love this point. My next question, and now we're already kind of coming to an end. So this is more of like an overarching question. And let me compare it to kind of like KFC has like these 11 secret herbs and spices, right? What is the secret sauce of effective, impactful account planning?
Max, that's a great question. And everyone's under non-disclosure, right? So I can't talk about this publicly. So the small details count a lot.
Yeah.
Number one, and so from a facilitator standpoint, right? And I've been facilitating meetings for 20 plus years. Creating the right environment and creating a safe space is absolutely critical. You want people to feel comfortable talking openly, right? And if there's an issue, you want to be able to have those issues brought up. And by the way, one of the key factors is preparation. If there are important technical issues, you don't want the customer bringing that up in the account session. Hey, we have a Sev 1 problem. How come no one's called us? Let's get that taken care of before the session, because otherwise the session gets derailed. So number one, the small details count. I would reserve meetings months in advance at Oracle because we were meeting. We were resource constrained from a meeting standpoint. So if someone said, hey, Lee, I need to do an account planning session in 4 weeks. Do you have a room? It's like, yeah, I got one. And so like the simple stuff, good rooms, food, all that stuff. That's the simple stuff. Preparation, right? Help the rep walk into that meeting knowing the environment. Now, here's a funny story. We were running an account planning session. It was a national account, and there were about 30 people in the room, including an RVP. And I had sent out a packet like 2 weeks before. And I asked a question. Packet described the company, and it was a well-known company. Many of the reps had called in that company for a long time, and I asked a question like 20 minutes into the session. I said, "So what are the total annual revenues of Wyndham, and how does it divide among its hospitality and timeshare and its third business?" And it was crickets. It was crickets, and it was embarrassing because it was in the document. And then from the back of the room, the RVP Jeff Perry speaks up and he goes, it was on page 14 of the handout that Lee sent out 2 weeks ago. And I was embarrassed for all the people in the room because they all reported to him. And he was the only one that had looked at that material to be prepared. So sometimes, even if you do the work for the team, they don't always prepare. And so I changed my process to help ensure that people were better prepared. So that's one of the key pieces. Personally, I think account planning needs to be professionally facilitated, right? Because the CAD or the SAM or the sales manager, they aren't necessarily trained on facilitation, and they've got skin in the game, right? They have a particular point of view. And so I think professional facilitation is important, and absolutely the single most important thing, the customer has to be part of it. And again, I'll go back to that previous customer I mentioned. Towards the end of that account planning session, the customer said, "Help me see around corners. Help me to know what I don't know that I don't know." Right? You Oracle team, you have experiences with companies similar to mine, similar sizes, similar industries, et cetera. You see what other people are running into. Tell me in advance before I step in it. And so the customer's participation is the single most important part.
And the next question is actually also like tying into this. It became like a tradition in this LinkedIn Live that we would ask our guests at the end about their most important learning or their one key takeaway. What would that be for you, Lee?
Personally, to work with partners that have similar mindsets.
Yeah, nice. Makes a lot of sense. And Lee, if people, because we're already running a bit over time, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way to get a hold of me is just through LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
I'm already tagged on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me with a comment or a request for a connection. And so, so to add on to what I said just a minute ago, Max, every time I see an email from anyone at our PDO, my face lights up, because we're going to take a deep dive into something that we both are passionate about, that we all are passionate about. So, it's important to work with people that have similar mindsets.
And your current company, what kind of companies are you working with? Is it the bigger ones? Is it scale ups? Is it a mix?
Well, I already mentioned that 3-letter name company. So so some of the bigger ones, and I love working with emerging companies because their needs are very straightforward, very specific, and they don't have as much running room or capability as some of those larger companies. So those emerging companies are fun too. They very much appreciate the big company experience that we bring to emerging companies.
Amazing. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, everyone, for watching, for joining us. Make sure to connect with Lee on LinkedIn. Make sure to follow our PDO. And see you next time in March. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Max.